Hey everybody, this is Mr. Wagstaff here. So today we're going to be talking about the growth of populations and how that led to civilizations. So in the last lesson we've been talking about how humans developed over time and came up with the farming revolution. We'll talk about revolutions in later units as well, but the farming revolution is a fundamental change in the way humans had lived for millions of years. They were nomads, they were just wandering around, hunter-gatherer mentality. Then all of a sudden they learned that they just grow their food and keep their own animals. They can make a lot more food. When you have a lot more food and no longer have that scarcity of food issue that they were having, all of a sudden, much bigger population. Much bigger populations, you start having like cities and civilizations. And there's a big question, how do humans interact with each other? There was no blueprint for this, so they all had to kind of figure it out on their own. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Alrighty, let me put myself here in the corner. There we go. Alright, so growth of population. Tons of farming created a lot of food. Alright, again, with food you can have more people because you can feed them. As populations rose, the first villages turned into the first cities. Job specialization is something that's going to happen. This is where that people have so much food, and it used to be with hunters and gatherers as a nomad that everybody's job all the time had to be to try to find food. That's not necessary now. There's other jobs that people can do, so you start kind of ranking people in society on this idea of job specialization. Let me show you a picture here to make it make more sense to you. So, and yeah, I'll have to do it myself. I'm good here. So, what you have here is, and a lot of times, because one of the most ancient, massive civilizations will be Egypt, because they were near the Nile River. The Nile River would flood a lot of times, and it would cover their banks and make for very, very fertile soil once the water receded. So, one of the earliest that has a very complex culture that recorded a lot of their stuff are Egypt. So we use them as an example a lot, but a lot of their ideas are across all civilizations. This is the Egyptian idea of job specialization, that you'd have the lowest level here would be unskilled workers. It looks like people just carrying water from the rivers and stuff like that would be your job all the time. The next step up would be farmers and herders. So they would be above. It's almost like a class system, like a ranking in society. The next step up would be farmers and herders. So their job would be to keep farming. All right. Above that, you would have shopkeepers and scribes, like people who would make stuff, make baskets that would make these pots you see down here that are getting carried by these people. That these things would be created by somebody, and there'd be artisans and things like that. Up here you have priests and nobles, and we'll talk just a really small bit about organized religion in this unit, really small, and we'll hit on a lot more at the beginning of unit 2, in the next unit. And then at the top you'll have your leader, whatever that might be in each society. So this is the Egyptian society. The main thing here that is across all societies is that there are divisions of people, all right? That not everybody is doing the same thing. The pharaoh isn't going to be the guy whose job every day is to bring water in or to farm or to make baskets. Everybody has their own specific job. That is really different than the way it was done under the nomads, because the nomads would just everybody would do the same thing every day, and that is just walk towards the elk or walk towards whatever animal you're trying to hunt. And once you get into a society, everybody has a very different style of doing things. The first question we'll get to today is question number 4. How did advances in agricultural production enable early peoples to form permanent settlements? All right. Why were people not in permanent settlements? Because they're always looking for food. The advances in agricultural production, meaning agriculture means farming, they just learned how to do it. How did advances allow people to make permanent settlements? You can make the food come to you now. All right. You can grow it next to your house. You can keep animals in a pen and breed them and then eat the offspring. That is how life worked, right? That is what they were able to do with the advances in agricultural production. Is when they learned how to farm, they didn't have to move anymore. Whereas the nomad, you constantly would have to. All right. So that's the question there. If you don't already have that, again, pause me. Now's a good time to pause. You can pause me in this form. All right. So once you get those, we'll, just move on. Always look ahead and see what the question is because I'll answer it as I go through. All right. 7 features of civilization. Now, I'm with my master's in history, I could argue for and against these all the time. So this is very straightforward. And it's no point getting deep into the what classifies a civilization argument. So we'll go with the basic 7 features of civilization. You can just ignore all that. That's my own brain trying to argue with myself. Got to know my audience. All right. So 7 features of civilization. So the vast majority of civilizations throughout history have these things in common, if not every single one of them. So if you look at a group of people who are like, is that a civilization? See if they have these things. If they do, they're absolutely a civilization. And if we're being honest, if they didn't have 1 or 2 of these, they're still going to be considered a civilization. These are just very common where across the world, in different groups that had never met each other, never interacted with each other, that almost all human civilizations have this version of this in their society. Social classes, a ranking of people in society. As we just saw in the previous one with Egypt, just using them as an example, the pharaohs at the top. You know, like the pharaohs higher than the lowest unskilled workers and like the nobles and the priests that they're ranked. So there are social classes. Not everybody is equal. That's like a natural thing. And just because you always say natural doesn't mean good, but that is a thing that happens in human societies, is that people start ranking each other. All right, doesn't necessarily mean somebody's worth less. It just means this person does this job, this person does this job, and they contribute equally to the overall society. But they're still in their separate little categories. There are a lot of places where they have a higher and lower. And that's actually more common, and I think we have acknowledged that in today's society, and we try to allow people to be different, but try to make them as equal as possible. All right. So even in modern society, you're still going to have social classes, all right, and some type of ranking system for people who do what and how they're treated in society. Most old societies, they weren't treated equally. Anyway, we can go on that forever, but social classes are a thing. A system of writing, a way of recording communications. This is the one I always want to argue about because Native Americans in the United States did not have a system of writing, especially the ones on the East Coast of the United States. And they're clearly a very advanced, effective civilization, but did not have writing. So just because, you know, you're still a civilization even if you don't hit all of these, but it is very rare not to have a system of writing. The downside to it, and I can use the Native Americans on the East Coast of what is present day the United States as an example, there's nobody to defend their history. John Smith shows up in America and basically just gets to trash talk the Native Americans into history books, and there's no way for the Native Americans to combat against what we've learned. A lot of them aren't real true things he was saying, and a lot of that is because they didn't have a system of writing. And we don't know a whole lot about their ancient heritage as opposed to somebody who does. So not only is writing great for long distance communication, it is extremely effective in recording stuff so that people later on can see it. So it's good across distance and over time. Art and architecture. We saw cave paintings from the cavemen, all right? Just like having an innate idea that there is a higher being or a spirituality that's inside humans naturally, there's also a sense of art. And then if you got to build houses, because you're going to be there, use artistic integrity to build houses, and that's called architecture. And it's just a way of societies expressing themselves, and art is a very individual thing, so societies kind of develop their own style of art and architecture. Job specialization, we already talked about that. Complex religion. So while spirituality is a natural thing inside people, that usually gets shown in a complex religion in a society where they're like, okay, those feelings you have, here's what they mean. And there's a very complex religion that people will follow in societies. Is across the board. I don't personally know of any civilization or group of people who do not have some sort of complex religion in one way, shape, or form. Public works. This is really important for a society. Public works, things such as roads and aqueducts that are designed by society and used by society with no private ownership. Like in our society today is roads. We all pay taxes. That goes through the government. The government builds the roads. All right. So who owns the roads? Everybody and nobody at the same time. That would be a public works. Something that is made by everybody for the benefit of everybody. And roads are always really important in early civilizations. And then an organized government. You have to have somebody in charge. It is extremely, extremely important to have some sort of organized government, which is part of the question here. Why is it so important to have an organized government? You got to have everybody working in the same direction. Just like people being able to speak was initially very good to learn how to hunt so you could communicate, the government basically organizes how society is going to run. All right. And the more people it benefits, the more successful that government is. So without an organized government, it's just pandemonium and people aren't going to work together. There's no way you're going to have a public works. There's no way you're going to have an effective society without some set of rules and regulation. Doesn't mean there's like a king necessarily. A lot of times that'll be what happens. It could just be a group of guys or women who make the rules, or it's just the biggest warrior there, be like, do what I say or I'll chop your head off. It's probably the original leaders. But guess what? Everybody followed Bubba over there with a big old sword because you didn't want your head chopped off. That would be considered an organized government, is Bubba. All right? Because if everybody's on the same page, it makes society function smoother. Now, if Bubba isn't a very good leader and he's like, everybody set your crops on fire, Bubba's not going to be in charge very long because the society's going to collapse. These are some of, again, we've been just using Egypt as an example of an ancient civilization. This is Egypt's style of writing. They're called hieroglyphics, but it is their system of writing. They didn't use an alphabet. We'll talk about that later in this unit when the Phoenicians show up and create the alphabet that we use today, or a version of it. So a lot of times other civilizations like Egypt here are going to use pictures that symbolize words, and we're referring to those specifically as hieroglyphics. All right. And so the question is, why is it important for all civilizations to have some form of organized government? What would happen if there was no organized government? All right. We already talked about this, so you can pause this and go through and answer it. If you don't remember it, you can always go backwards in the video some and see where we had talked about this. All right, Mesopotamia. So we're going to get down to the very first civilizations here. Let's see. All right. This is the very first area of societies that are going to show up. I got a map here. Let me show this to you. All right. So, this is Mesopotamia. This is the Middle East present day. This would be Israel, the Mediterranean Sea. Italy would be more over this way. Egypt, all right, is right here. And this is the Nile River, all right? So we've been talking a little bit about Egypt today. This is the Nile, and the banks will flood, make it very fertile here. And this is provide a lot of food. This is actually going to not be the very first civilization. The very first civilizations, and when we talk about civilizations, we talk about big, massive cities, all right, are going to exist here, all right? This is present day in like Iraq. So Mesopotamia, there are two rivers here, the Tigris, all right, and the Euphrates River. These two rivers have a lot of fresh water. It is very important. All civilizations have to be near fresh water because humans have to drink water. All right. You also need water for animals. You also need water for crops. All right. You try to water your crops with salt water, you ain't gonna have very good results. So you have to have fresh water. All civilizations are going to show up near fresh water. And here, you're between two rivers. All right. Tons and tons and tons of fresh water. For that reason, the very first civilizations are going to show up here in this region that is referred to as Mesopotamia. So there were quite a few that we know about that existed here. The most famous, all right, is a city called Babylon. So Babylon, we'll say it's here, all right. So Babylon is a city, and it's very, very famous, mainly because they had what's called codification of laws. So they had a leader. His name was Hammurabi. All right. So Babylon is going to be a very successful city at the time because Hammurabi decides to do something different than almost any other leader at the time. He's really the first one to do it. Is he takes the city's laws and he has them carved into stone. All right. And it's called Hammurabi's Code. And we actually have, this is Hammurabi's Code. This is crazy that we still have this. But, and again, it's pictures and stuff like that. Why that is important is most people couldn't read, all right? So what would happen is if your friend got in trouble and you're the leader, you'd be like, oh, it's not a problem. But if somebody you didn't like got in trouble, you're like, off with his head. And it was very unfair in society. It really made you fearful. Like, what if a leader decides to kill me because I did something wrong that I didn't even know was wrong? So what Hammurabi does is he comes up with laws and he writes them all down and then shows them to everybody, all right, and explains them to everybody. This is called codification of laws. Just writing down laws. Extremely important in society. Almost every civilization that we're getting ready to talk about for the next few units all had a codification of laws, because the civilizations that had a codification of laws were better because everybody was treated equally, in theory, all right? That if you broke a law, you knew what the punishment was, all right? Now, Hammurabi's Code, another reason it is very famous, it was brutal. The term eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, literally comes from Hammurabi's Code. You get in a fight with somebody and you knock his eye out, he gets to gouge your eye out. Like in a court of law, like that is the rule. Like you knock somebody's tooth out, he gets to rip your tooth out. Like it is absolutely horrific. If you, and it, like some of these law, they're all crazy. If you're a son and you try to punch your dad, chop your hand off. Like just, you're like, oh my gosh, like how brutal was this place? It was pretty brutal. All right, like these are not feel good laws, but everybody was held accountable to the same laws, and it made for a very strong society because people knew what you could do and what you couldn't do. Letting everybody know what the rules are and making sure that they're fair and equal among everybody makes for an effective society, and Hammurabi is the first one to really use a codification of laws, and the societies after Babylon and Hammurabi that decide to do the same thing also have a lot of success. All right, so the questions here are, where is Mesopotamia? It's in the Middle East today. And why is the location being between rivers so important to the beginning of a large civilization? As we talked about, there's a reason they needed to be around large rivers. What do you have to have for a civilization? You have to have fresh water. And then what is so important about the codification of laws and how is it useful in society? That's what we just got done talking about. So we should be good on these. If you haven't answered 6 and 7 in complete sentences, pause this now and go back through and answer them. All right. Development of religion. We're going to talk a lot about this in the next unit, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but there is a concept here that I do want you to know. There's 2 main concepts of religion that are going to come out. There's polytheistic and monotheistic. Polytheistic, of the time period we're talking about now, which is thousands of years ago, most cultures were polytheistic, means they believed in a whole bunch of gods. Like you had the moon god and the sun god and the water god, and you had a different god for everything. All right. Monotheistic religions is religions that believe in only one god. They're really not going to come out until Judaism is going to come out. We'll talk about it more in depth next unit. But Judaism leads to Christianity, and then Islam comes out. Those are the three main monotheistic religions. That means they just believe in one God. So mono means one, poly means multiple, and theistic means the belief in a God. So polytheistic believes in multiple gods, monotheistic believes in one God. And then the reason this is important now is because of the codification of laws. One of the reasons that Judaism is going to take such a strong hold in the religious world is because really early on, the Jewish religion has a codification of laws. Laws and rules that are written down for everybody to see, which are the Ten Commandments. With Moses presents the Ten Commandments in the Jewish religion, and that is a codification of laws. These are a clear set of rules and guidelines that you have to follow in that religion. So, codification of laws is not only fundamentally important for civilizations, it is also very helpful in religion as well. And then the question here is, what is the difference between polytheistic religions and monotheistic religions? And we have already talked about that. So explain that in complete sentences, and you're done with this part of the lesson for the day. See y'all tomorrow.